Good day. My name is Tanabari Kabu. I'm here with Salesforce with TK, where I talk about all things Salesforce. Today, we're diving into one of my more favorite topics within Salesforce, and that is Salesforce's query language, SOQL. This is something that I leverage in my everyday work within Salesforce, querying data, being able to see specific data from my users and my team. Knowing Salesforce's query language helps a ton in my day-to-day, and that's why I want to make this mini course where I'll be diving into things that I leverage on a day-to-day. There is a full syntax of Salesforce's query language, and we won't dive into every specific topic. We're going to look at things more from an admin perspective and just being able to pull data when you need it and learning how to do that within your organization. We're going to dive into Salesforce documentation first. I always recommend that so you can get a good foundation of understanding what you're doing within Salesforce. Trailhead is also a great resource as well. So let's go ahead and dive in, right? So Salesforce Object Query Language, SOQL. Use Salesforce Object Query Language, SOQL, to search your organization's Salesforce data for specific information. That's key. SOQL is similar to the select statement in the widely used structured query language SQL, but is designed specifically for Salesforce data. So to recap, essentially, if you're familiar with the popular SQL, this is Salesforce's version where you're able to pull specific Salesforce data for information within your org. Let's dive into a few tools. The tool I leverage the most is Salesforce Inspector Reloaded. This is a Google Chrome extension for those that don't know. Once you dive into it, you could just click Data Export. It'll take you directly to the query editor, and essentially you could start writing your queries here. So this is Salesforce Inspector Reloaded. Next, if we dive into the developer console, which is out of the box from Salesforce, this is Salesforce's tool where you can go into query editor and then start writing your queries here as well. A great tool that I recommend. Last but not least, we have Workbench, great querying tool. You can filter by a specific object that you're looking for. For instance, if we're looking for account, we can look into account. Then we can see our account fields, and we have our query editor here where we can start writing our queries. So those are tools that I use the most. I use Salesforce Inspector Reloaded the most, as I stated, but those are also great tools that you can leverage to start writing your queries. In our next session, we'll dive more into the syntax. We'll kind of look at a few basics, and then we're diving into part 2 of our mini course within Salesforce's Object Query Language, SOQL. And now we're diving more into the syntax of SOQL, right? So we can understand how to structure our queries and how to actually write queries, right? There are a few standard or required syntax for writing your queries. The most basic one, or the starter, is select. Let's just read Salesforce documentation as always. So SOQL query syntax consists of a required select statement that specifies the field to query. The field list in the select statement specifies the list of one or more fields separated by commas that you want to retrieve. So essentially, as I stated, select is always required within all queries that you write. You can think of select as selecting the fields that you want to see within your query, right? So if you're on account and you want to see account name, account type, those key fields, you would write those within your query. Let's look at our first example of a query. You see select is our required statement, right? And then we have our fields list afterwards. So fields come directly after select, right? So in this case, we have only 2 fields. We have ID, we're selecting the ID, and then name. We haven't got a chance to dive into from, but from is also required as well. From lets us state which object we want to pull these fields from. In this case, our object is account, and we can pull from standard and custom objects. We're pulling from account in this case. So this is our first example looking at query language. Let's dive into some more syntax and let's look at the where clause within SQL. So next, let's dive into the where clause within a Salesforce query language. So let's read through our documentation. So the condition expression in a where clause of a SOQL query includes one or more field expressions. You can specify multiple field expressions by using logical operators. How I think about where, from my point of view, is more of a filter, right? So you could kind of specify or break down your criteria further using logical or comparison operators to filter your data to your liking. So let's dive more into what that actually looks like and what that means. So we're going to our comparison operators. These are things that we're typically familiar with. We have equals, not equal, less than, less or equal, greater than, or equal. We're familiar with these operators that compare. For instance, if you wanted to see field names, like say, for instance, if you wanted to count that name that equals this specific syntax, right? This is a specific name. We could do that in that way. Or we have not equals as well. We also have logical operators, something that we should be familiar with. If you have a filter or you're leveraging your where clause and you want to check if both expressions are true, and then you also have the option to validate if at least one of the expressions are true. So that is your logical operators. Let's dive into our date format and date literals and where, right? So these are great because we could kind of filter our data using the where clause in our queries to be able to pull data for, say, a specific time frame. So in this case, we're looking at created date. So we want to see accounts that were created after this specific date here, 2005, October 8th, right? So yes, we can leverage, we have here's another great thing about date operators is essentially you're able to kind of write your queries based off like this type of text. So if you want to see accounts that were created yesterday, accounts that were not created today, you want to see opportunities that are closing tomorrow. So those type of things you can leverage with the date, last 90 days. So those are awesome as well. I'll dive into our null operator and where. I love null. This is a perfect example of a null query that I would write. Select ID from case where contact last name. So if there's a contact but the last name is blank or null, we would be able to pull that data. You see how it's leveraged as a filter to break down your data in a specific way to see specific records. It helps you get a little more granular. That is our initial look at syntax that I leverage. We're going to dive more into some more syntax as well. Let's take a look at order by. So let's dive into order by. That is another syntax that I leverage as well within SOQL. Essentially is being able to order your data by a specific field. So, and you have four options here. You could either do it in ascending order, descending order. You could dive into your nulls first, or if you would like to see your nulls last, you could do that as well. Here's an example of a query that leverages order by. We have select name, which is our field, of course. Industry is also our field. From our object account, and then we have the syntax ordered by. And in this case, we're ordering by industry. Doesn't look like he's using, or they're using ascend or descend, or no first or no last. So that's optional. In this later example, they show you that you could use descending and also nulls last here. So great syntax there. And last but not least, limit. This is something that I leverage as well. Essentially, limit is an optional clause that can be added to a select statement of a SOQL query to specify the maximum number of rows to return. You can limit the amount of data that you retrieve. So if you have 10,000 accounts within your org and you only want to see 100, you only want to see 10 records, you have the option to limit that. As you can see here, we have the option to limit accounts to 1 within that query. This is a quick dive into syntax. There's so much within syntax and SOQL. We won't dive into everything. Those are some of the more basic and day-to-day things that I leverage in my queries. Next, we'll dive into a few examples where you can see how powerful queries are. We dived into the syntax of Salesforce's query language, SOQL. We looked at the why of SOQL. We understand a little bit of the foundation, some of the required syntax that is needed to write a SOQL clause. In this video, we're going to dive into a couple use cases, and then we're going to show examples of actually building those queries within our org. As stated, we're going to leverage Salesforce Inspector Reloaded as our query tool for this use case. And let's just start fresh. And let's just dive into some of our use cases, right? So our first use case is a data cleanup. And essentially we have a field called high value customer. And essentially we want to populate that field based off business logic. So say for instance, an account that is considered high value in our org has more than, let's say, an annual revenue over 500K and also has more than 50 employees, right? So that is considered a high value customer. And if our stakeholders say, hey, can you pull that data so we can see that, and then we can do a data cleanup of the field, I'll showcase how we can leverage a query for that, right? As we stated, we're going to start with select as our required syntax, and then we have from account. So this is our baseline of our query, right? And then we're going to add a couple additional fields, right? So let's say we want to grab the name. And one thing I like about Salesforce Inspector Reloaded, your field value API names are here. So if you don't know the exact API name, as long as you know a little bit about the field name, you can kind of pull it all together here. So we have name as one of our fields. We have annual revenue, which is key. And then we also have number of employees, right? And then we also have high value customer, right? As one of our things. So that is our structure. So we can run it, and this is our initial query. So you can see how we could pull the data, and we can actually see the data here, which is pretty cool. But if we dive into our business requirements, we had a requirement that we wanted to see only high value customers, and we're looking to clean up this value here to make sure this is correct within our organization. And a high value customer, as we stated, their annual revenue would have to be over 500,000, and they would have to have more than 50 employees. So let's filter or break this data down even further, more granular, right? So as we stated before, we have our where clause. So we're going to leverage that here. So let's say where, and then we're going to look into the field annual revenue. And let's say our annual revenue has to be greater than 500,000, sorry. So 1, 2, 3, 4, there we go. And the number of employees, right? So we have our logical operator, and number of employees is also greater than 50, right? So our query looks good. Let's run. And here we go. As you can see, if this was a real business requirement, all our records within our org has our high value customers value as false. And these are actually really our high value customers. So we would want to export this data and then import it to update this value here. So that's an example of one use case there. Let's dive into a different use case on a different object, right? Let's look into the opportunity object, for example. So let's just build our baseline query. So select ID from opportunity, And as I stated, we can see suggested fields here from the opportunity, which is great. Let's just run our query, clear out that previous query. And so let's get started, right? So let's say our sales manager, this is our second use case, right? Let's say our sales manager wants to see pipeline for this year or at the end of this year, or let's say next 90 days, right? We want to see our pipeline for our next 90 days. So what opportunities are scheduled to close and et cetera, right? So let's go ahead and pull our data, right? So let's go ahead and add our fields. Say, of course, we would want to see close date in this case. Then we would want to see stage name, which would be important. We would want to see expected revenue, and then I'll add in account. Within Salesforce Query Language, based off the relationship between the two objects, you could actually dive into fields on related objects. So that's pretty cool. So you see, in opportunity, we could dive into account, and we can now pull account fields in. And we're just going to pull the account name for this use case. And let's just run our query first. And as you can see, we have our data here, which is awesome. But as stated, we have further requirements. We want to see our pipeline in the next 90 days. So I'll go ahead and add our where clause. And let's say close date, right? Close date equals next 90 days. And you can see we have a list of date functions that we could use. We're going to use next 90 days for this use case. And we want to make sure that we have opportunities that aren't closed. So we want to see our pipeline, right? We don't want to see opportunities that are already closed. So let's run this. And as you can see, this is our pipeline. We have 90 records that are within the pipeline in the next 90 days, which is great. And okay, so we have this data here. And let's say we wanted to even break it down further by using some of the other syntax that we learned about, that being that limit and also order. So let's say we wanted to limit this to, let's say, 20 records. We have 90 now. So, let's say limit to 20, right? Boom. So now we only have our first 20 records, right? And let's say, for instance, if we wanted to see close date of closing, opportunities closing, let's say this month, right? We could do that, which would be cool. And then we could say, let's say we want to limit it to 10, right? That type of thing. So those are great use cases and seeing the data in that way. Also, if we remove our limit, and we could, if we want to order our data, so say we want to order in, say, ascending order. So we want to see like in order by close date, right? Forgot to add our field. And then we could put that in ascending order. And there we go. So we can see in opportunities closing this month in ascending order, which is cool. And then we have the option that include limit as well. So say we wanted to limit our data to first 10 records, we could do that as well. So limit to 10, and we can only see 10 within our order by. So this is our second use case. We're going to dive into one more, nail it in the head. Let's say we're going to stay on the opportunity object from opportunity, and let's dive into our pipeline again. So let's populate our fields first, actually. So let's say that we want to do a data cleanup as well, but we want to see opportunities that do not have an amount. So say our stakeholders say, hey, I noticed that some of our opportunities in our org actually do not have amount populated. Can you pull those records so we can take a look at them and clean that data up? And you say, yeah, sure, definitely. I'll go ahead and pull it. And you dive into your query editor, and then you start writing your query, right? I'm just going to populate a few fields: name, stage name, close date, close date from opportunity, close date. And of course, we want to see amount because that's the field that we're looking to see if there's a value. And we want to just check, we want to add our where clause. We want to check that where amount equals null, right? So that's where that null comes in. So if there's no value for amount, please pull that data. And as you can see, we have 15 records in our org that do not have an amount. And we can give this data to our sales manager. Or if we know what the amount is, we could populate it just based off of your org and your limit. So these are really realistic day-to-day things that go on within my org and working in Salesforce. And I just love querying. It helps a lot when I need to pull data pretty quickly. Something that I would suggest everybody just dive into. You can start with your trailheads and just give it a test. I think it's very helpful. If you checked out this video, I just want to say I appreciate you. Thank you for everybody that takes the time to comment and like the videos. Please subscribe if this content was helpful to you. So yeah, thank you so much. Have a great one.